cultural signal that of what our narrative should be. How does hospitality look? How does friendship look? How does relationship look? And it's being affected by some other news. So that's the culture that's affecting us. Before there was 24-hour news, pretty much I would say that America was pretty much a biblical culture, and that the people knew that even though they maybe didn't know, they weren't living it, they knew the Bible stories, they knew the things that were quote in the norm and out of the norm. But we've moved, and so that's the same thing that happened with hospitality. The Greeks practiced hospitality in that it was they had some of the same stories that some have. They had a story in Greek mythology of a man who would look very poor, and he came in, and he the man took care of him, and they found out later he was the king, kind of the angel unawares kind of story. The Greeks had that same story, and so they said, we've got to be hospitable because maybe it's a god that we're being hospitable to. We don't know. So they kind of had that same idea, but their idea of hospitality was not I do something and get something in exchange. And we'll talk about that later, what the Romans did. But we give but we only give out of our abundance. If you have a lot, then you give. And it's interesting that Jesus' thinking does not allow that cultural emphasis to be on his teaching. Jesus said, hey, the widow who gave one little penny, a mite, was just as important as the man who had abundance of things and then gave out of his abundance. The Greeks' hospitality, if you had a lot, you gave a lot. And you were rewarded for it by social status. People saw you as being something special because it's kind of like, well, and we see that same thinking today in the Bill Gates kind of idea. Bill Gates has a lot of money, therefore Bill Gates gives a lot of money. And he gets on CNN and they talk about how much Bill Gates gave to, I don't know, climate change or whatever. But you very seldom hear about the person down the street who bought a pair of shoes for his neighbor's kids because they didn't have any shoes. We have that kind of thinking, which was very prevalent in Greek thought, was that out of your abundance you give. You didn't have to get anything in exchange, but you would get a point. You would get social status. People would look up to you as being, he's a good guy because he gives. Not bad, not a bad idea. But the Greeks took it one step further, and they said, look, there's no hotels at that time in most towns. So if I give and then later on I go to your town, then you owe it to me to give back. So it was kind of like, I got your kid on the ball team, on the football team, you owe me one. That's the same kind of concept. And we see that even in ourselves, even in church, even in our personal lives. I do something for you, but we don't say it, but everybody kind of knows it. You owe me one now. The problem with that is that it's not biblical hospitality. Biblical hospitality, if you saw in the Old Testament, and also we're going to see in Jesus, gave expecting nothing in return. It was very costly to be hospitable. It was very time-consuming to be hospitable, but you didn't have to expect it, and you probably wouldn't get anything out of it. Roman thought, which was also affecting the Jewish, I'm going to show you how it affects the Jewish thought and affects what Jesus did. The Roman idea of hospitality is that they'd have these huge, lavish meals. They would put on a spread, but they would invite only the important people to come to their house. You'd invite the governor, you'd invite the politician of the day, you'd invite an educated philosopher, you'd invite them to their home. Therefore, the hospitality, as opposed to the Greeks, they were going to use this as a tool to move up in status, move up in thinking. Again, we see that in our own form of people giving in America. Our culture says, out of your abundance you give. You give, you know, if you give something, hey, you owe me one, and I'm going to collect on it later. Or, you know, come join the Lions Club or the Shriners or whatever else, and be a part of us so that you can move up in status. So the relationship is at the Lions Club or at the Shriners or at whatever. And that gives you clout, because now you can say to the community, oh, you know about, you know, John, he, did you know that he, you know, is a member of the Chamber of Commerce? And as soon as you say he's a member of the Chamber of Commerce, you elevate John to a different status. And so you take all the chamber people out to eat, you go and eat with them. And so, again, that's hospitality as defined in America, but I'm just trying to say it's not biblical hospitality. Biblical hospitality is much different. Biblical hospitality gives without asking anything in return, honors those that have nothing but give what they can. I said again, the widow. Or gives without worried about social status. We know that Jesus did that. He said he ate with the publicans and sinners. So let's look tonight at how Jesus started and how he used hospitality. Let me just say here, the first handshake that you have with a person, or the first greeting you give to a person, is the first step of discipleship. We don't have discipleship classes and then you become a disciple. It's interesting, in Jesus's calling of his disciples and him asking them to come, some he said, hey, leave everything you had, come and follow me. He was very distinct. He just said, hey, I'm going to make you fishers of men. You were fishing, come and follow. But you know, there were some others that he called and he said, just come and see. They didn't know what they were coming to see. He just said, come and see. Look, be around me, partake of my relationship, partake of my hospitality, partake of what I do, and you'll learn. He started his discipleship at the very beginning, not because they were believers. In fact, you find out later, overall, you go all the way into the resurrection before some of his disciples said, you know what, now I believe. And they were with Jesus for 3 years. And yet they weren't classically what we call believers. And we see that in church. Sometimes you want to rush people into a class or a relationship that's unnatural. And that's the reason I'm saying biblical hospitality is a natural occurrence. It's something that Jesus did on a daily basis and a very relaxed thing. He went and he said, come and see. And guess what? We're going over to so-and-so's house tonight. He's invited us. Zacchaeus invited us over to eat tonight. We're all going over there to eat tonight. I met him just a few moments ago. We're going over his house. He's invited some of his friends. We're going to eat. Oh, we're going over to Mary and Martha's house tonight. We're going to go there to eat tonight. Sometimes you see him, and that style was very simple, very relaxed, very natural. And he wasn't doing even Jewish hospitality. Let me tell you why. The Jews had been affected by the Greeks and the Romans, because that was the culture of the day. They were occupied. They were not free as a nation. And that thinking had came on them in a certain way that you see it reflected in what they would say to Jesus. He's eating with the publicans and sinners. He's not getting any status out of this. Probably in Jerusalem at the time, there were probably 60 different synagogues. You could have a synagogue, if you had 10 people that were interested in sitting under your teaching, you could form a, quote, not the main temple, but you could form a synagogue. And some people said there's probably maybe 60 of them. And what those teachers, it was interesting, what those teachers, it sounds so much like today, what those teachers were always trying to do is one up the next rabbi, so you'd come over to his synagogue and your synagogue would be more important. And so you'd get 10 people together. That gave you the ability to have a official synagogue. So relationship building and having someone over to a Jewish home was like, come over and eat and be a part of I'm forming a synagogue. And sometimes I guess they did, and sometimes they said, well, I'm already going to a synagogue with Rabbi Johannes or whatever, I don't know, whoever. And so Jewish culture took on that Roman and Greek thing, saying, I'm being hospitable to you, but I want something out of it. It wasn't the business they were wanting to get out of it. It wasn't the social status, but it was religious status. I'm going to look better than the other rabbis. I'm going to be better than those who only have 10 people. I've got 15 people now coming to my house, and I feed them, and they love me, and they sit under my teaching. Have we heard that before? I think we have. We're, come over to our church or come over to our house. We're doing this and this and this. And then we say, and we do it naturally. Every pastor I know compares to, look, how many are you running now? How many times have I heard that, And of course, they always use the joke, I'm running after 500, but I only caught 2. That's the standard joke that everybody tells, So, but again, that's Jewish culture, but it wasn't Jesus culture. It was Jewish hospitality. It was Greek hospitality. It was Roman hospitality, but it wasn't biblical hospitality. So how did Jesus do? He called his disciples. He said he didn't make a pretense he didn't con them. He didn't say, come on, I'll make you fishers of men. And, or let's say he said that. He didn't say, come and I'm going to help you find the best fish. And he did that later. He showed them where to fish. Go to the right side, and that's where all the fish are at. But he didn't entice them with something that they would get if they followed him. What they would get was servanthood, and what they'd get would be an example of who he was. So Jesus' hospitality was not based on what you would get, but what you would give. And so he didn't say, we're going to do this, we're going to climb up the social ladder. He made it very simple. Remember when he said, if you give a couple of cold water, and it's interesting, he doesn't say, give a cup of cold water in my name in Matthew. What does he say? Give a cup of cold water in the name of my disciple. And I found that strange. Jesus did not even take credit for many of the things that he was admonishing his people to do. In other words, he wasn't saying, now John's doing just what I told him to do. He just said, hey, follow John. Do what John, because John's going to give you a cup of water, because John saw me giving the Samaritan woman a cup from the well. He followed in by example. So our hospitality that we do to people is saying, hey, come over to my house, eat at my table, watch what I do. And hopefully what you're doing at the table is what can be emulated by them. You get up and you help your wife set the table. You go, oh, well, I don't know. My wife always takes care of that, and but maybe you get up and you do that and they go, did you see John? I saw it. Honey, why? And the wife said, why don't you do that more often? He was washing the dishes even afterwards. I never have. When was the last time you washed the dishes? Wow, put them in the dishwasher, and I turn it on, and, and we make our excuses. But what we do around the table and the things that we do is the most natural setting for teaching and discipling people. And it starts, again, discipleship, and does not start with the relationship, does not start with them coming to your house. The discipleship process starts with your first greeting. with that first handshake, with that first smile. That's the reason I always tell people, hey, you meet someone, don't give them one of those sick dog handshakes, you know, and that the little limp fish kind of handshake. You ever met like it's what I call the mortician handshake, where it's kind of clammy and you know you don't want to shake their hand again. Or the guy that says, "Oh, we're so glad to have you," and they give you that smile, and I call it the sick dog smile. You know how that smile dogs get when they're eating grass? They kind of go like that, you know, and they eat, you know, you're going, oh, and that's what I see some other church people go smile, go, so glad you're here. And then they're going, you know, and you're going, was that authentic? People pick up on that. And they know when relationships and when you're really interested in them. So in our relationship process, as we be like Jesus, we're not trying to con people into the gospel. We're trying to teach them and lead them into the gospel. If you invite someone over, it's kind of like saying, hey, come over, we're having a picnic on Saturday at my house. And you don't tell them, everybody there is going to be from the church except you. And they get there and they're going, I don't know anybody here. And everybody knows everybody else except them. And it's kind of like, oh, you set me up. I know what you're trying to do. You're just trying to, and yes, we are trying to get them into church. But we want to be concerned enough about them as a person that even if they never come to our church, we still concerned about them. We still love them. We still concerned about who they are. And that's what Jesus did. Not everybody that Jesus talked to came to him. Remember the rich young ruler came to him and said, hey, man, I've done everything. I want to be one of your followers. And Jesus said, go sell everything you have. Go back and follow me. He didn't come back, as far as we know. Some people are not going to buy in to your message. You're going to invite them over. They're going to sit around your table. And at the end, they're going to go home. And you may never see them again until 5 years later. I don't know if you saw the rich young ruler later on in his ministry. And the rich young ruler came. We don't know. We know that people like some of the scribes and Pharisees followed and looked far off. And then later on, they became followers. So anyway, Jesus' hospitality was very pure, very simple, very practical, very natural. He didn't ask for anything in return. He gave. For example, when he fed the 5,000, what did Jesus get out of feeding the 5,000? Well, they had 12 basketfuls left over, but they had 12 disciples. So I guess every disciple got a basketful to take home with them. What did Jesus get out of this? I guess he got a piece of fish and a piece of bread, but we don't see him taking, I'm taking home all that, Pastor, we do get this. This is something we kind of get for being pastors, which is, Jeff's pretty good, is when you have a meal at church, if one of your good parishioners know that you like lemon bars, and they made lemon bars, they always say, Pastor, you want to take home some lemon bars with you? And you get that, so you have to, of course, you don't want to offend them, so you always take some lemon home bars home with you, and you get some treats that the other people may not get. That's one of the perks for being a pastor, get lemon bars. But whatever, but I'm just saying, Jesus got nothing out of this. He fed the 5,000. They had 12 baskets left over. They went home with the disciples. And, but again, look at the principles. He gave without getting anything in return. He gave in abundance. Everybody got fed, and he had more than what they needed. He gave in abundance. He gave more than they needed. There was nothing they had to do except sit on the ground. And it's interesting what he did when he made them sit on the ground. Do you remember the story? He said, sit in groups of 50. Why did he make them sit in groups of 50? Now, if you're a business major at college, you will say, because God is organized. And business is good business when you get everybody and you make them organized. And if you look at the organizational chart of our church, we know so Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday we have this. At 8 o'clock we do this. And if you're a business major, and yet from the psychology, the emotional kind of idea, I think he made them sit in groups of 50 because he wanted them to get to know each other. Hey, sit and get to know, while you're eating, sit down and get to know the other people that are in this group of 5,000. He broke them down so they could form relationships with each other. So the next time they met, when they had 4,000 people there, and probably some of the same people came that were at the last meeting, because I heard that Jesus was feeding again, and there was a lot of food left over. You could eat as much as you want, and there was still food left over. Some of those people said, I did not see you at the last feeding. Didn't I see you at the church? So, oh, yeah. You were in my group, weren't you? Again, relationships are being formed, and Jesus did it in such a natural way that it just flowed. It just happened. Again, we look at he initiated it. He gave more than they needed. He gave all that they needed. They had left over, and he helped them to develop relationships. Now, again, the Jews were very good at using the table and feast. And as I said before, the rabbis at these synagogues used a lot of times the feast as a showcase of their ministry. We have to be careful, so sometimes we do the same thing. And sometimes it gets a little bit awkward. Some women are very good at making a fancy table with little napkin rings and the forks all lined up, and then, the salad fork on the right, and then the next that you use, and then you use the next fork, and then the little spoon on the left, and then the big spoon, and the soup spoon that's at the top of the plate. That's good. But if you're not one of those kind of organized, you don't have to have a table spread. You just be natural who you are and said, hey, I'm cooking on the barbecue tonight after church at my house. You want to come over? Be glad to have you. I'm making chicken legs, whatever. Have you ever made chicken legs before? And you go, no, but it's first time. You'll be my guinea pig. That. Just be natural. And that's the kind of thing people pick up on. The authenticity, people recognize. They know when you're being authentic, and they know when you're being fake. But let's go look at what I call Jesus's biggest display of hospitality, and that's the Last Supper. We don't usually think of the Last Supper in terms of hospitality, but what did he do? He provided a room, or the room was provided. He told them, go get this person, and they'll tell you where to go to. Jesus set it all up for them for the Last Supper. They ate. He gave. And let me show you how much he gave. What did he give when they took communion? This is my body, which is broken for you. This is the blood that was shed for you. At Jesus' Last Supper, the supper that he showed his hospitality to the max, he gave himself to the people and used the examples that were right there. Again, it was so simple. It was so easy. Everybody knew they were eating. Everybody knew this was the Passover meal. Everybody understood, and Jesus just flowed from that into a natural occurrence of, hey, you see this bread? I'm giving you myself, and I'm going to shed my blood for you. Remember me. Next time you go home and you eat, when you eat your bread and you drink whatever you're drinking, remember, I gave myself to you. And so communion, we've institutionalized it. But communion, I think that communion is every time I sit down with a meal. Every time I sit down and I eat, I can think, Jesus gave himself for me. To me, that's communion. And Jesus did that the last time. In fact, he gave himself so much that Judas is betraying him. An act of betraying. What does Jesus say? The man that's dipping and eating with me right now. In other words, in the act of hospitality, even the man who's betraying him, Jesus is still loving him. I'm amazed. I'm amazed that he didn't say, hey, get your hand out of this thing. You're getting ready to use that same hand and collect this silver and betray me, and I'm going to be killed the next. And, no, he said, the man that's going to dip the bread with me right now. I'm going, that doesn't sound like us. but it does really sound like Jesus. Because have you ever had a person over to your house and they're sitting around your table and they say, we're having beans and rice tonight. And they go, I don't like beans. You go, well, that's what we're having tonight. Well, I'm not eating them. You go, you know what? This guy can go home as far as I'm concerned. I cook these beans and rice. He doesn't like beans and rice. But hey, there's the door. That's what we were thinking in our mind because he offended us. And Judas was offending Jesus to the max. He was betraying him to death. And yet Jesus was reaching out to him. I'm amazed at that. And I'm amazed that around our table sometimes we get offended when people don't act like we want them to act. But if we're doing true hospitality, we're giving them without anything in exchange. We're giving about not wanting to get something out of it. We're giving knowing that, he may not even like it. And yet we still give. That's the biblical hospitality. That's biblical culture. That's Jesus culture. So what does Jesus do at that Last Supper? He gives himself. He washes their feet.
Oh, Rodney, I think that
And he showed them what we should do. Now, again, after, what does he do? Does he continue on? Yeah. After the resurrection, what happens again with Jesus?
Rodney,
He's on the Emmaus Road. Yeah, go ahead.
could you back up and repeat what you were saying when Jesus washed their feet, because your internet froze for probably about 10 seconds, and I'm not sure we caught what you said.
I was just saying that at that Last Supper, that he gave himself in servanthood to the point, giving us the disciples an example. Remember at the beginning, he asked, just come and see. Some he said, come and follow me. But others he just said, come and see. And some of those people were not believing in Jesus yet. They were just watching. And I'm just saying, and they watched how he washed their feet. He gave himself, said, this is my body and blood. And that's the same thing that people do when they come over to our homes and eat. They watch us. They're looking at everything we're doing. And when we're showing simple servanthood, giving ourselves in ways that are hospitable, they will respond accordingly. Not all of them. Some of them will not like it. Some of them, I spoke to a man today. A guy was coming for counseling. His mother asked me, would you call my son? He's having some really big, and he's way, way out there. And I called the son. He said, no, I'm not interested. I said, well, your mother said you may need some help. Don't need no help. Don't want any help. Don't want you to come. Don't want you to talk to you. Not coming over. I said, well, if you need something, just give me a call. I've never had time to really talk to the guy or anything, but I was totally rejected right from the start. I was going to take him out to eat. I was going to do the hospitality bit. You're going to try, and then some people won't. Jesus got 11 out of the 12. He did pretty good. And so if you invite some over, some people are going to love you, and some people are going to say, I'm not coming back. That's on them. You just serve. And that's what Jesus did. Jesus gave himself to the people. He washed their feet. He fed them. He gave them examples. He loved them. He said, I don't call you anymore disciples. He said, I call you friends. And when you become a friend to a person, when that person calls you friend, friends want to be where your other friends are. You know why people go to church? They say 85% of a poll was done by, George Barna. 85% of the people return to church because their friends go to church. That's the only reason they go, because they 85% come to church because my friends go to that church. So what happens though after Jesus dies? Again, is he hospitable? Is he doing the same thing again? Yeah, he's still teaching. He's on the road to Emmaus. How and when do they recognize Jesus on the road to Emmaus? Do you remember the story? When do they recognize Jesus? This is a question I want you to answer, okay? That's not a rhetorical question. That's a real answer. Do you know when they recognized Jesus on the road to Emmaus, what happened? Anybody? Okay, I'll tell you. Jesus is walking, and they think it's maybe we don't know who the two men, somebody think it was his cousin or something. We're not really sure. But anyway, he's walking. Jesus meets up with these two men, and the men invite him to come over to their house and eat with them that night and stay with them. And Jesus accepts the invitation. And they go there. They still don't even recognize it's Jesus. But they recognize him when he broke the bread. Which tells me, did they understand communion? And then he was breaking bread for communion? No, they understand, oh, that's Jesus. He cares for us. You know, he's always doing stuff. We went to Zacchaeus' house, and we went over to Matthew, with Matthew and his friends, and we went over, we're always eating together. And Jesus would always break the bread and give it around to everybody. That's Jesus. They recognize Jesus through his act of serving. And they said, we know who he is. Jesus stayed the night? No, it says instantly he left. He didn't stay the night, but they offered. But he did show them, again, this is what you do. What happens later on? He's in Luke 24, he's eating again after the resurrection. There he's eating. And he goes, in fact, after the resurrection, every time you see Jesus, he's eating. Every situation, there's Jesus. He's eating again. I'm thinking, that's good, because if you have your resurrected body and you get to eat, that's going to be a lot of fun. Because that'd be awful if you went, you were resurrected and there's somebody saying, down on earth, we used to have, crawfish etouffee, and now, what we're having here, we go, oh, we're having beans and rice, and you can't eat any of it. But in your resurrected body, what did Jesus do? Man, he ate fish, he ate bread. In fact, which my wife likes to remind me of, Jesus knew how to cook. I can't cook a thing. I'm the world's worst. I can do bacon and eggs. That's about it. And make Pop-Tarts in the morning for breakfast or a heated honey bun. That's all you get out of me. Jesus meets his disciples, and they come to the shore, and they're out fishing. And he's already got a fire made. And he comes and says, hey, guys, come and eat. I got some fish and stuff cooking on. Let's have breakfast. Again, it's so natural. It was just right. Why fish and bread? Because they were next to the sea. He didn't add to do anything special. That's what they normally ate. They're fishermen. They ate fish and bread. So what I'm trying to say to us is that the biblical example is not the Jewish example. It's not the Greek example. It's not the Roman example. It's not the example we see in American culture. Our meta-narrative, or our thing that ties us all together, is our biblical narrative, is our biblical culture. If Jesus did it, I'm telling you, you need to do it. If Jesus was hospitable, you need to be hospitable. If Jesus had and ate, and then you eat too with your neighbors and your friends. If he washed their feet, and I always think, well, what's foot washing equivalent in America? When we don't wash people's feet. There's a lot of different things we could do to serving a cup of coffee and you pick up the tab. That's an act of washing people's feet. Or you go by their house and pick them up and take them to work. Or there's so many things we can do that follows Jesus' example. So we looked at the Old Testament example. We looked how things changed. And we're not trying to follow the Jewish culture. Don't get me wrong. We don't want to follow Jewish culture where we're trying to con people into being part of our synagogue. We're not using the meal we're using a meal, yes, as a tool. But even if they'd never come to your church, you still love them enough to continue to work with them. God is a God of the long term. And as I said, what you start, it may take a while to finish, but you just keep loving and you keep doing what Jesus did. Anyway, so tonight we see what Jesus did both before the resurrection, after the resurrection, and what are we going to do in heaven? What does Jesus do in heaven? We have the marriage supper of the Lamb. We're still eating. I don't know. Is Jesus cooking? He may be. Maybe. I don't know. Up there, I go, this is not why Jesus, I was thinking in my mind, this is not why Jesus, he's supposed to be in a white robe, and he's down there with a cooking apron on and those big old gloves. He's making barbecue, what are we going to have at the marriage supper of the Lamb? I'm not sure. Anyway, my mind was going, where should I say, when we have the marriage supper of the Lamb, are we going to eat lamb? If it's marriage supper of the Lamb, no, that's different, I guess. Are we vegetarians? I think, you never know. Maybe go back to they were before the fall, or they're all vegetarians. Maybe it's okay to be vegan. I'm not sure. There goes your shrimp, guys. There goes your catfish. There goes your fried chicken. But let me tell you, I was when I first went to Japan. I'll just tell you a funny story. First went to Japan. The very first day we got there, the pastor said, we're having our annual pastors, minister alliance kind of thing. And this year it's over at the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So we went over to the Seventh-day Adventist, and I wasn't real familiar with Seventh-day Adventist, and they had the best steak and everything. And the pastor, he said, that was all soybeans. I said, man, that was good. Because they don't eat meat, And but they had really good burgers. They would fry them and everything. It was just soybeans. But anyway, I learned something new that night, that you can be vegetarian and eat good still. But any questions you want to have about hospitality in the example of Jesus? Most of you are muted, so I can't hear any of you talk. So if you want to share.
No, it's all good.
Huh?
I was blessed. That was good.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Very, very rich, Rodney.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's an easy way to win people and gain weight at the same time.
Hey, I missed something earlier up in when you transitioned from the Jewish, Greek, Roman, and talked about American hospitality. Then you gave real quick your 3 points about biblical hospitality. I missed the first one. I didn't have time to write it down.
Well, in biblical hospitality, you're the initiator always. You don't wait for someone to invite you over to their house before you return the invitation. You initiate the hospitality. Not only do you initiate it, you pick up the tab. In other words, you don't say, and I had this happen to me at the church recently, not too many people in northern Arkansas have so far, we've been here for a while, have invited us out to eat. But we had this one couple that invited us out to eat. And we got through, he picked up his check, walk out, and I'm going, I thought when someone invited you out to eat, they're supposed to pick up the tab. So I was looking, I had my money, and I picked up the tab and, paid my way out. But in biblical hospitality, Jesus picked up the tab. He said, I got the fish here ready. You guys don't have to do anything. You don't have to, I'm not taking up an offering at the end of it. And you always give more than what's necessary. Every time you see Jesus, or even in the Old Testament, they initiate the hospitality. It's very natural, and you don't expect nothing in return. And you give more than is being asked for. And so that's many of the 3 points that I was talking. So, and of course, again, you give of yourself. It's going to cost you. It's going to be timely. It's going to be costly, both money and time and effort and energy. But you're not trying to impress. You're trying to lead them into the gospel. You're trying to lead them into understanding of who Jesus is. And a very natural way of doing it. Anybody else have a question?
I agree with you.
Oh, you
I
got
think you just be yourself and try not to be something that you're not. You don't have to impress anybody. Just be who you are, and that's it.
Yeah, God made you the way you are, and if you're a coffee drinker, drink coffee, and they drink tea, then buy them a cup of tea, instead of a cup of coffee. Be sensitive to their needs. Again, a lot of the millennials are vegan. If they want to eat vegan. Who cares? Beans and rice, that's vegan. And you can eat a lot. Just leave the sausage out. But anybody else?
Well, we're not here to impress people. We're here to love them.
That's right.
It.
Exactly.
Amen.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And that's what Jesus did. He moved them to the point. You remember, they were disciples, they were pupils, and then he moved them to the point where they're friends. I don't call you servants anymore. He says, I call you friends. Man, I'm a friend of God. That's pretty good. Anybody else?
Rodney, your comment about meals being a communion time reminded me of what I think was the most significant moment of communion that I've ever had in my life, and that was in Cameroon. And it was after I preached at a service with a small church out, I'm not sure which it was, one of the Kenyan villages. And I preached, and the chickens and the dogs are all around and everywhere there with you. But the pastor had arranged, he wanted me to come to his house afterwards. There wasn't time for a meal, but he wanted me to come there. And the Cameroonians really picked up on everything about you. And because some had been here earlier in the States, they knew that I liked Dr. Pepper. And so I'm here at this pastor's home. It's very, very simple. There's no Dr. Pepper in Cameroon.
Right.
But he had a loaf of bread, and he had went somewhere and he bought a bottle of Coca-Cola. And that was there just for me.
Yeah.
And we sat there and just, I couldn't speak his language. He couldn't speak mine. And we just sat there and ate pieces of that bread and drank the Coca-Cola together.
Yep.
And finding out more of his story later, as you know, traveling as an American, you just carry prestige with you. There's just still an element of that as an American. And his dad, who lived in the compound next to him, very much shamed him about being a pastor and was very opposed to him doing that, and just looked at him as kind of a failure. But I discovered later in conversation that my going to his house as an American pastor validated him in his father's eyes, that his son was legitimate in what he was doing. And I just think about the Coca-Cola and the loaf of bread just sitting there in this little hovel in the middle of a village.
Yeah.
Communion unofficially.
Well, I said we a lot of times we invite people just out to eat. But when you invite someone into your home, I think it speaks a lot more.
Yeah.
When you invite someone in your home, you've said, okay, I'm willing to have you be a part of me. You're now in my inner circle. And the inner circle, as you make friends, it's really good to have as many people as you can in that inner circle. It's not my four no more. It's my four, and let's keep going, And as I said on the communion thing, it says in the Bible they broke bread daily. Now, I don't know if that means they had communion or they broke bread and it was every time they ate it was called communion. I don't know. They remembered the Lord's death until he came. And so sometimes the Orthodox people and a couple other guys, they kind of got a better insight on this sometimes than we do on what communion really means.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, anybody else have in closing, I just say, when you get and they come around your house, talk to them and actively listen. There's a difference between listening and actively listening. Have you ever talked to someone, and I do this, I am bad about this. This is my fault. I'm telling you, my wife tells you, everybody tells me. You start talking and I'll interrupt you before you finish your sentence because I want to say something before you finish. I want to get my words in there, and you be talking, and all of a sudden I go, yeah, but you know what? I had that same thing happen to me. And I keep telling myself, Rodney, quit doing that, because I need to hear what the person says before I want them to hear what I say. And man, that's a habit that I've got that I wish I could break, because I'll interrupt you before you get your sentence out. And my wife says because I'm hyper, but I don't think I am. She says I am, but I don't think I am. But anyway, that's what she said. I'm probably, some of us are ADHD, some of us are just ADH, some of us are just plain D. So anyway.
Rodney, thanks for sharing with us again tonight. This was really rich and challenging and encouraging. And you had the statement you said very near the end. I wrote it down. God is a God of long term, and that's encouraging. Hey, can we just thank the Lord of the host, who is also the host?
That's right.
Prepares a table for us in the presence of our enemies. Can we just thank him for that?
Yep.
Lord, we do. Father, tonight we are so thankful that you have invited us in. Lord, you've called us into your household. You've made us part of the family. Lord, thank you for the rich manna you feed our souls. Thank you for the marvelous model that you are for us in following and learning of you. Father, I pray that this virtue of hospitality would begin to take root and grow in our lives. I pray it grow in Jeff and Mary Ann, Father, that we will be people who are hospitable, Lord, and that the community can see Covenant Church is a hospitable place where people are loved, they're accepted, they're brought to Christ. And I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good night.
You too.
Okay,
All right.
thank
Thank you,
you.
Rodney.
All right.
Good to see
You guys.
everybody.
Hey.
Father's Day Sunday. Guys, we got treats for you.
You gotta put mine on ice.